Hello and welcome to this special series on adaptation of literary sources into TV and films. We are talking about dialogues. Now, dialogues are a very important process, I would say, in the conversion process or in the adaptation process. If you are trying to convert a short story or a poem or a novel into television and films, dialogue is the very important and the most difficult I would say step. So, dialogue is not conversation. Eavesdrop on any coffee shop conversation and you will realize that you would never put that random talk on screen. Real conversation is full of awkward pauses, poor word choices and phrasing, non-sequiturs, pointless repetition. It seldom makes a point or achieves closure. Talk is how we develop and change relationships. Screen dialogue therefore must have the swing of everyday talk. We are revising our thoughts even as we speak. It is the most often unstructured, spontaneous, improvising thing. Conversation does not normally have a strong element of spontaneity, of improving, of changing things as we go along. People speak in fragments and contraction. For example, picture a scene in which one student roommate asks another if he would like to go to a disco. A beginning screenwriter might write something like this, like John, a character, यार मैं तो बोर हो गया हूँ, चल आज डिस्को में जाकर नाच गाना करते हैं. And his friend who is Aman, let's say, says नहीं यार मुझे असाइनमेंट बनाना है और ये बहुत ज़रूरी है, तुम ही जा आओ. So at level of rhetoric, this language is too formal. Spoken language is much more informal than written language. Spoken language is filled with sentence fragments and word contraction, the sort of things that are frowned upon by English teachers expecting formal written prose. Giving dialogue and attitude is something we are discussing, but we can still improve this dialogue by making it more personal, making it more revelation of character. In a screenplay, dialogue must serve at least one of the two purposes. It must move the plot forward or it must reveal character. So, how do we personalize dialogue? By giving it an attitude, in the sense that dialogue becomes a verbal imprint of individual character. I will again rephrase the dialogue which we had just mentioned earlier, and in the context of what we have just said, we are again we have changed the contents of the dialogue, and you just see what are the changes that we have made. So, the same character John now says, दोस्त मैं तो बैठे बैठे पक गया हूँ, चल डिस्को में जाकर चिल मार कर आएँ. And his friends Aman says, यार अगर ये असाइनमेंट पूरा नहीं किया तो इंटरनल्स में डबल अंडे मिलेंगे, तू ही जा, मेरे को तो अभी बहुत मगजमारी करने का है. सो समथिंग लाइक दिस. यू हैव सीन that we have changed it into conversational language and the things which are not exactly grammatical, but the things which you normally get to hear in a hostel room. So, of course, we have to avoid the normal pauses, the contractions, the normal bridges, vocal bridges that we make like ah. Of course, if we deliberately want a character to do this, of course, that is another matter, but otherwise normally while writing dialogue, it has to sound conversational, but it has to be written first rate and has to be delivered first rate without any flaw or any kind of audio bridge or any kind of mental remapping of what we are going to say. So, the first rewrite improves the rhetoric by making it informal, spoken speech, but the dialogue is still primarily informational. In the second rewrite, we have infused the dialogue with attitude, wrapped the information in the point of view of the character. We begin to learn something about who the characters are, by the way, and how they are speaking. So, lines with an attitude is a good way to describe dialogue that reveals character. and it's a major key in writing unforgettable spoken language. Let us look at patterns of conversation. Interaction between two speakers, if we are talking about that, you record a conversation on a recorder, it's messy. We continuously interrupt and speak across each other. We listen to the listener's dialogue. So often the listener will interrupt exactly with and other things that we have just mentioned, or exactly the same thing happened to me. So there are a lot of things which we would not like to be there in a short film. And when we are writing dialogue, however, we often find ourselves unconsciously tidying up the mess. That is the key point. Sometimes we anticipate what the other person is going to say and sometimes end their sentence for them. This can be an extremely irritating character trait, one which can be reproduced to humorous effect, of course. Then very often people speaking together know each other well, or when the speaker is aware that the listener has a particular knowledge of the topic under discussion, a type of verbal shorthand is used. Most obvious example is professional jargon or technical jargon. So at a shoot, the camera person may instruct his attendant, baby ki mundi kaat yaar. Now in this technical jargon, that means that he needs to tilt a light which is used in shooting, which is called baby, and he needs to tilt it down a bit. The dialogue writer should keep in mind this aspect of shared knowledge and shared assumption of the two speakers. Conversational ping pong. Now in this form of fictional dialogue, every topic is clearly introduced, that is, we can call it the serve if we want to compare it with tennis. Then there is a series of speeches, each a logical response to the previous one, which we call the rally, and a new topic is only opened when the previous one has been exhausted. The ball has gone out of the play and there is a new serve. So this conversational ping pong is the most common form of poor dialogue produced by inexperienced screenwriters. In normal conversation, more than one topic is frequently being dealt with at the same time. There may be things that are dealing with misunderstanding which may arise, or not dealing with them and having the misunderstandings develop further. The occurrence of silences within conversation, a speaker going off at a tangent, or one speaker verbally not responding to the words of other but some other physical action. There is also the particular agenda and state of mind that each character brings to the scene. In other words, dialogue is inextricably bound up with characterization. Now if you talk about character and dialogue, before writing every scene, ask yourself, what does this character want in the scene? Characters have some sort of agenda for each conversation. Dialogues reflect histories of and tensions that exist between character, their ongoing semi-conscious agenda. Every piece of dialogue is informed with the character's attitudes. Make the dialogue sound like the character, not the writer. Keith Johnstone in Improvisation and Theatre, that is a book, explores the proposition that much of our speech and action attempts to raise our status relative to that of those around us. Very often this is not done in an obvious way or consciously. Status is not static but relative to others present and fluctuates depending on what is being said or done. Different individuals have different attitudes towards status. Some are ruthlessly using it, others doing it less aggressively with greater subtlety. Let us take an example. A nuclear scientist may have a friendly, chatty relationship with a hairdresser until the hairdresser finds out what his customer does for a living. Now the hairdresser feels ignorant and inhibited in such company and clams up completely for the fear of looking foolish. The nuclear physicist changes to another hairdresser and this time refuses to be drawn into any chatty conversation on his profession, or perhaps pretend to be someone else altogether, let us say a taxi driver or a chef or whatever. The relationship with this new hairdresser is allowed to continue to be friendly, but there is an awkwardness of the nuclear physicist always having to be careful in order not to be discovered. So, that is a small example. Do not make your dialogues work too hard, do not cram your dialogue with too much information. Dialogue cannot be used as compensation for the absence of a narrator. When dialogues are made to work too hard, they take the place of a narrator. Dialogue must not be used to substitute events. No character ever talks just to inform the audience. Sometimes in television, teleplays and films, two characters talk about something only for the benefit of audience. Characters must tell each other only what they need to tell each other, not what the audience needs to know. Other aspects of conversation are the use of dialect and the use of slang and accents. The biggest misuse of language in Hindi film has been the South Indian accent or the overzealous and fastidious Punjabi. Mahmood's accent in the film Padosan compared to Konkana's accent in Mr. and Mrs. Iyer are two completely different uses of accent in dialogue. While one is caricaturized, the other is very naturalistic. So, let us talk about silent screenplay. The best advice for writing television or film dialogue is you should not. That means you never write a line of dialogue when you can create a visual expression. The first attack on every scene should be, how could I write this in purely visual way and not have to resort to a single line of dialogue. Obey the law of diminishing returns. The more dialogue you write, the less effect dialogue has. If you write speech after speech, walking characters into rooms, sitting them in chairs and talking, moments of quality dialogues are buried under this avalanche of words. But if you write for the eye, when the dialogue comes as it must, it sparks interest because the audience is hungry for it. Lean dialogue in relief against what's primarily visual has salience and power. Alfred Hitchcock, the great filmmaker, once remarked, when the screenplay has been written and the dialogue has been added, we are ready to shoot. So, image is our first choice, dialogue the regretful second choice, and the dialogue is the last layer we add to the screenplay. Less is more. Now, this is somewhat different to, I would say, a stage play where dialogue is the mainstay and it is a very strong tool for bringing out the conflict. Here there is a difference between television, that is the audiovisual media, and theatre play. Now, let us talk about purpose of dialogue. Now, it gives credibility to character, it helps us to believe in the character. Dialogue can characterize, but speech is the only one path to understanding character. Dialogue advances plot. All dialogue your characters speak should be caused by their need to get something. Dialogue can be used to modulate tension in a scene. Now, let us talk about subtext. That is a very important component. Subtext is that which is not written, that is between the lines. You cannot put two human beings together in a room without creating a subtext. In his book Steen on Writing, Saul Steen asks 4 questions of dialogue. Establishing the condition it must meet. Number 1 is, what is the purpose of exchange? Does it begin or heighten an existing conflict? Number 2, does it stimulate our curiosity? Number 3, does the exchange create tension? And number 4, does the dialogue build to a climax or a turn of events in the story or a change in the relationship of the speakers? Steen also notes how interesting dialogue is often oblique. He gives many examples in his book. One is this exchange, how are you? Fine. This is a boring ordinary exchange, but when we change it to how are you? Oh, I am sorry, I didn't see you. We create interest because the person does not answer the question, which establishes the subtext. Something more than meets the eye is going on here. Ordinary speech is boring, and good dialogue is carefully crafted to give spoken exchanges tension and mystery, direction and conflict. What is not said directly but nonetheless communicated is subtext, meaning under the literal surface of speech. A pejorative term for poor dialogue that has come into fashion is on the nose dialogue, which is opposite of dialogue. Russins and Downs define it this way in their book Screenplay, Writing the Picture. When a character states exactly what he wants, it is called on the nose dialogue. The character is speaking the subtext. There is no hidden meaning behind the words, no secret want, because everything is spelled out. But most interesting people, and certainly the most interesting characters, don't do this. Normally, do not let characters ever say what they mean. Screenplay lives in the subtext. Now, let us have some tips on dialogue. Here are a few recommendations about writing convincing dialogues. None of them are cast in stone, but until you are comfortable enough with the rules to know how to break them, you will work better if you keep them in mind. When writing dialogue, keep in mind the character, the status, the relationship between two characters could be manipulative, competitive or nurturing, the subtext or the unspoken meaning of words, that is, which is not written. You cannot put two human beings together in a room without creating a subtext. Accent or dialogue, speaking style, rhythm and sentence length, professional jargon, naturalism, effective dialogue that gives the illusion of real conversation, the tone, the mood. The dialogue should complement visual behavior. It should be lean and short, avoid long speeches, less is more. The key test to any line of dialogue in a script is this: what is lost if it is removed? If precious little is lost, then cut it. Every line of dialogue needs to move the story forward in a fresh way or to make a point about character that we don't know already. Verbosity is your enemy, less is more. Avoid chit chat, avoid time pass dialogue, greetings, polite nothings, goodbyes. Of course, if the script needs it, and if a subtext is one of the factors, it should be done. Then repeating information, answering every question asked, an oblique, indirect or non-answer may reveal more about the state of mind of the responding character. Greetings, bye-byes, weather exchanges, unless they are loaded with subtext. Now, avoid goofy tags, really, my God. Of course, when the script demands it, definitely, but not normally. Keep to the conflict. If there is no conflict for the two characters in a piece of dialogue, then the dialogue has no place in your story. Dialogue illuminates character faster than any amount of exposition, but only if you give your characters something interesting to talk about and something that moves your story forward, and that means conflict. Don't let characters speechify. What worked in a Shakespearean monologue does not work in a dialogue between two people. Fictional dialogue is about give and take, meant to sound realistic but sharpened by the fact that each character needs something and by the fact that their needs do not mesh. You won't get two-page speeches if you remember this. Remember that people breathe while speaking. Read your dialogue out loud in your normal conversational tone of voice. If you run out of air part of the way through a sentence, rework it. Add punctuation, break it up, rip out the flowery stuff. Avoid talking heads. Have characters do something while they speak. Here are some things you can do to improve your skills at writing dialogues. Read your script aloud. The written word is not the spoken word. Even better, get your script into the hands of actors. Do a stage reading of your script. Your ear will tell you what your eye will miss when it comes to poor dialogue. Listen to the speech of people around you, on the bus, in a restaurant, at a party. Listen especially for the idiosyncratic rhetorical patterns that you can borrow and adapt to your work. However, do not make the mistake of believing that real speech is the goal. Dialogue is always crafted. It is in fact more interesting than real speech, but gives the illusion of being real speech. Again, I am repeating this thing again and again. Write with subtext. People normally don't speak as directly as characters do on a soap opera in a television show. Let them speak obliquely around their two emotions so that listeners or the audience will discover meaning through feelings, through the heart. Rewrite your dialogue and read your script aloud again and again. Hope you have benefited from this whole experience that we have together, and adaptation of literary sources into other medium like television or film. I think you have got a fair idea about it. Thank you so much for watching.